The marble floor of the Apostolic Palace did not smell of incense on June 12, 1493. It reeked of roasted boar, unwashed bodies, and the cloying sweet scent of burning beeswax. In the center of the Vatican's darkest wedding was underway, a spectacle of excess that would stain the history of the papacy forever. Lucrezia Borgia, barely 13 years old, sat frozen beneath a canopy of gold thread, her heavy pearl necklace feeling more like a collar than jewelry. Beside her sat Giovanni Sforza, the man purchased to secure her father's northern flank. Pope Alexander VI, Rodrigo Borgia, did not sit in prayer. He sat on a throne of red velvet, laughing too loudly, his eyes scanning the crowd, not for piety, but for leverage. This was no holy union. It was a transaction of flesh and iron signed in the heart of Christendom. A single tall taper candle on the high table dripped hot wax onto the linen, counting down the minutes until the public bedding, the moment the doors would close, yet the eyes of the family would remain. Why did the Vicar of Christ demand such a visceral display of ownership? And what terrible secret was buried beneath the noise of the feast? Does a father sell a daughter or sacrifice her? If you enjoy these dark histories, leave a like and subscribe and comment below where you're listening from. And now, back to the story. The iron hinges of the great cedar door groaned shut, severing the private suite from the Apostolic Palace's roar. The abrupt silence was heavier than the clamor it replaced. Lucrezia Borgia was gone. In her place was Donna Lucrezia Sforza, a designation stamped onto her by the force of papal decree and the weight of a Milanese treaty. Her new status was an institutional brand, replacing her identity with a diplomatic purpose. The air in the bridal chamber, meant to be warm, felt cold and thick, carrying the ghosts of political maneuvers. The scent of sweet wine and sweat now mingled with the chill of unfeeling stone. This was not a marriage. It was an exile performed on silk sheets. Her chambers were splendid, lined with tapestries depicting ancient victories. Yet, they functioned as a gilded cell. The Pope's crest, the rampant bull, was woven into the curtains, carved into the furniture, and stamped in wax upon every legal document, a constant, silent overseer. The message was absolute. Everything inside these walls belonged to the structure of the Borgia ambition. The key to the door was held not by the groom, but by her father's political necessity. Giovanni Sforza paced, his ceremonial velvet chafing him as much as his role. He was not a conqueror here, but a nervous recipient of a package too valuable and too dangerous to handle. Lucrezia retreated into the deep quiet of her own mind. She offered no tear, no word, no struggle. It was a willful withdrawal, a refusal to grant her keepers the satisfaction of her pain. She stared at the faint pattern in the ceiling plaster, learning every fault and fissure, building a silent map of her confinement. She had been taught from birth that the only choice she controlled was how quickly she submitted to the inevitable. She learned that silence was a fortress built of cold fear. And yet, there was a glimmer of false light, a kind of dark mercy offered by the system itself. If she fulfilled her singular function, if she could secure the alliance by delivering a robust, legitimate heir to the Sforza line, then the worst of the political storm might pass her by. Her compliance would earn her survival, perhaps even comfort, within the constraints of her new name. The hidden price, however, was the complete surrender of her autonomy, turning her into a mere vessel for the dynasty. Failure to conceive, or failure of the marriage to hold its strategic value, meant swift, brutal cancellation. Like a piece of furniture, she would be disposed of, ready for the next transaction. How long until the pawn understands the game? The condition laid before the 13-year-old girl was explicit and terrifyingly simple: comply and solidify the dynasty, or resist and watch the Borgia papacy crumble under French artillery. A contract signed in ink was fragile. It could be torn by a change in the wind or a shift in the mood of a king. But a contract sealed in blood and fluid, witnessed and verified, was binding under canon law. Pope Alexander VI did not deal in ambiguities. He required absolute confirmation that the Sforza seed had taken root in Borgia soil. The demand was not for affection, nor even for passion, but for a mechanical, repeated conquest that could be cited in a court of law. The corridors outside the bridal suite were not empty. They were filled with the silent, suffocating weight of expectation. The deprivation here was total. The removal of the last private sanctuary a human being possesses. Lucrezia's test was not of faith, but of dissociation. As the night deepened, the atmosphere in the Vatican apartments shifted from festive to forensic. The revelry outside the heavy doors died down, replaced by the hushed, expectant breathing of the family inner circle. They were the architects of this union, and they waited for the construction to finish. She was expected to submit not just to a husband, but to the cold geometry of political necessity. "Look at me," Giovanni might have whispered, seeking a human connection in the transactional dark, but he found none. She offered a single, cold refusal. She would not be present. Her body remained, a warm, breathing statue of soft flesh, but the Lucrezia who played the lute and laughed in the gardens had retreated deep behind her eyes. She stared past him, into the heavy velvet darkness of the canopy, fixing her gaze on a singular knot in the gold embroidery. She denied them her fear. She denied them her shame. By refusing to acknowledge the violation as anything other than a medical procedure, she stripped the act of its power to destroy her spirit. What was meant to be a breaking of the filly became the tempering of the steel. The silence of the victim is the loudest sound in the room. The pressure escalated with the gray, unforgiving light of dawn. The morning brought not privacy, but a total invasion of the self. The witnesses, ambassadors, family members, the Pope himself, required the report. The chamberlains entered not to serve breakfast, but to inspect the linens. The 3 times was not a private memory. It was a tally shouted across the breakfast table, a crude metric of the alliance's strength. Records suggest the Pope announced with boisterous pride that his daughter had been bedded 3 times that night, turning the act into a statistic for the Milanese envoy to record in his dispatch. The wax that had sealed their marriage contract had barely hardened before it was tested by the fire of this public scrutiny. This resolved the core question of why such barbarity was permitted in the Holy See. Alexander VI needed to prove that the Sforza link was irrevocable, a physical fact that no future legal maneuvering could undo. He was solidifying his northern border against the coming French invasion, and his daughter's body was the mortar. The price, however, was absolute. The hidden cost was not just her innocence, but the sanctity of the papacy itself. By dragging the nuptial bed into the harsh light of political scrutiny, the Borgias had dissolved the line between a sacrament and a sale. Lucrezia realized that her capacity to endure this humiliation was her true strength. The discipline required to sit at that morning table, while her father joked about her night, became her armor. She took the shame meant to break her and wore it like a second skin, impervious and cold. Does the statue feel the chisel? 4 years later, the wax seal that had bound the Sforza alliance had turned brittle and gray, cracking under the pressure of a new political reality. The candle that burned during the wedding feast had long since guttered out, but the smoke remained, obscuring the facts. The 3 times boast, once shouted by the Pope to terrorize the French, was now an inconvenient stain on the family ledger. The Borgias no longer needed Milan, they hungered for Naples. And Giovanni Sforza was merely debris in the path of the bull. To clear the way for a new, more lucrative husband, the Vatican machinery began to grind in reverse. Lucrezia sat in the convent of San Sisto, a sanctuary of stone and silence where she had been sent to await her rebirth. The walls here were not draped in gold velvet, but in whitewashed austerity. She performed a wordless rite of memory, not of prayer, but of erasure. She stood before a basin of cold water, washing her hands, scrubbing the imaginary scent of the Sforza from her skin. It was a ritual of undoing. She was 21 years old, a woman who had been bedded, celebrated, and scrutinized, yet she was being prepared to walk out of these doors as something impossibly new. She was to be declared Virgo intacta, a virgin untouched. The hidden place where the truth was buried lay within the restricted stacks of the Vatican's secret archives. Records suggest a flurry of frantic correspondence in late 1497, letters inked with urgency and deceit. The Pope, the infallible voice of God on earth, prepared to issue a decree that contradicted his own boastful announcements from the wedding night. The narrative was inverted. Giovanni Sforza, the man previously praised for his vigor, was now declared impotent. The 3 times were legally dissolved into mist. The Vatican claimed the marriage had never been consummated, that Lucrezia was a pure vessel, trapped in a sexless union. A lie told once is a sin, a lie told thrice becomes law. To solidify this fabrication, Lucrezia submitted to the ultimate humiliation, a physical examination by a panel of church-appointed matrons. In the dim light of the convent, surrounded by the smell of stale lavender and judgment, she allowed them to verify a lie. She remained silent as they inspected her, her face a mask of porcelain indifference. She knew the truth of that wedding night. She remembered the weight of the sheets and the sound of the door locking, but she also knew that truth was malleable in the hands of her father. The hidden truth revealed itself not in what was said, but in what was signed. Giovanni Sforza, threatened with assassination if he refused to corroborate the lie, signed a confession of his own impotence. He did so with a sword implicitly pressed to his neck. The 3 times were erased from the timeline, replaced by a legal fiction that restored Lucrezia's value as a diplomatic asset. She emerged from the convent not as a widow or a divorcee, but as a virgin ready to be sold again to the House of Aragon. The true darkness of the wedding was not the act itself, but how easily the Vicar of Christ could annihilate reality to suit his ambition. Can ink wash away the stain of memory? The Vatican records are vast, miles of shelving sinking under the weight of centuries, but they are also a graveyard of redacted truths. In the years following the annulment, the name Giovanni Sforza was scraped from the Chronicle of Rome like dried mud from a boot. The 3 times he had once been forced to perform were struck from the ledger, leaving behind a blank space where a marriage had been. Art historians today scan the frescoes of the Borgia apartments, looking for his face among the painted crowds, but he is a ghost, a figure painted over, blurred, or omitted entirely. The family did not just divorce him, they deleted him. Yet, erasure is never perfect. A man who has been forced to sign his own humiliation does not vanish quietly. From the safety of Fazzaro, Giovanni unleashed a whisper that would outlive them all. He claimed the Pope dissolved the marriage not for politics, but for jealousy, that the father wanted the daughter for himself. It was a rumor born of spite, a distant witness shouting into the wind, but it stuck to the Borgia name like tar. The wedding feast of 1493, with its roasted boar and gold canopies, was forgotten. Only the dark echo of incest remained. The Vicar of Christ had scrubbed the legal record clean, but in doing so, he had stained his family's soul with a legend they could never wash away. Lucrezia Borgia lived another 20 years, moved across the chessboard to Aragon, then to Ferrara. She died at 39, a pious woman wearing a hair shirt beneath her silks, trying to atone for sins that were largely invented by the men who owned her. The heavy pearl necklace from that first night, the collar of the dynasty, had finally been removed, but the marks it left on her neck were permanent. We returned to the marble floor where the single taper candle dripped its hot wax, counting down the minutes to her violation. That wax has long since hardened and been scraped away. The noise of the feast is gone. The father who sat on the velvet throne is dust. But the question asked that night remains, echoing in the cold, empty halls of the Apostolic Palace. The wedding was never a union, it was an altar. And the sacrifice was not just her body, but the truth itself. Subscribe, hit the bell, and like. Does the ghost haunt the killer or the house?